Okay, we slowly have folks coming in.
We
I think
can,
we'll go
Rebecca,
ahead
so
and
they
get
can see.
started because our session is only an hour and we want to make really good use of our time. My name is Rebecca Bustamante and I'm an associate dean in the College of Education. And I have with me here our fantastic team, our faculty outreach team. And this is our last session in our Racial Justice and Education series for this academic year. I also want to extend thanks to the center, the CSU Center to Close the Opportunity Gap, which has been a partner in presenting this Racial Justice and Education series. So today our topic is on debunking myths of critical race theory. Over the past year and a half, you've probably heard a lot about critical race theory, and it's been in the news. But we realize that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what critical race theory is and how it's used. So I'm facilitating this session just to give you a sense. I am a professor of educational leadership and have used critical race theory in teaching graduate students and advising graduate students for about 25 plus years. And so I'm quite familiar with critical race theory. And so we are going to talk a little bit about what it is and what it isn't, and then give you some time in some groups to actually look at real scenarios and determine how critical race theory shows up in those particular scenarios. So the first thing we want to do, Corinne, if you want to give me the second slide there, is we want to find out what you already know. And so we're going to launch a poll and ask you to read the statements and respond whether this statement is true or false as it relates to critical race theory. So we'll take some time to do that. Is everybody able to see the poll and be able to respond? Okay, excellent. I feel like we need that Jeopardy music or something. Okay, we're rolling in here. Okay, I think we have to just take another minute to get through the 8 statements. Someone's saying they're not allowing them to submit. Lori, were you able to submit now? Okay, we'll just take. All right, I think it looks like we're ready. We want to, if everyone can see the responses. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this. So we're going to go over some of the historical facts and tenets, and I think some of your answers will become apparent. So instead of going through each item and saying, oh, this is true or false, let's see what we can learn from putting some facts out there. So if you can move to the next slide, then Okay, the first thing, oh, I guess, have we shared those results? Okay. Okay, so we have some pretty well-informed folks here. That's good to know. And some differences. Okay, all right. So just to provide some historical facts, one of the statements was that CRT is a new theory. And so it is not a new theory. It has been around since the 1970s. It started in what we call critical legal studies, or in the law profession. Derek Bell is famously known to have proposed this theory in the 70s. So again, not new. It's typically used in graduate level courses. That was one of our statements. It is not explicitly taught in K-12 schools, as often presented. It's sometimes confused in K-12 with culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive pedagogy, increasing the teaching of Black history or other histories of traditionally marginalized students. It's been used as a label to look at any kind of culturally responsive or racially responsive actions in K-12 schools, but it is typically taught in graduate level courses to use to frame how racism is institutional and systemic and shows up in law and health and education and a lot of the things that we do in the United States, and how it plays out. Critical race theory was expanded by Delgado and Crenshaw and many other scholars in the 1990s to include the notion of intersectionality, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then famously in education, it was introduced by Ladson, Billings, and Tate. And so I'm sure many of you that are educators have seen those citations in your books. And that CRT does refer to critical race theory and not culturally responsive teaching, which is maybe why it's sometimes parents that disagree with culturally responsive teaching believe that it is in the schools when they see those terms sometimes. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So just some of the key, what we call tenets of critical race theory. Some of the tenets, or we call them components or aspects, like the key ideas behind critical race theory, there are really 5 that were original. And then, as I mentioned, intersectionality was folded in the 90s. But the fundamental tenet or belief behind critical race theory is the permanence of racism. And so just that racism is historic, it's endemic or baked into US society, but not just in the United States, but globally, the inequities that we see as a result of racism and how they play out in our institutions. Another is that there's a critique of liberalism. And so that one often is kind of confusing because this notion of, oh, well, isn't that a good thing? Well, the critique is actually critique of colorblindness, or the idea where people say, oh, we're all the same inside. And why are we being divisive about race? Race shouldn't matter. That's considered colorblindness. And there is CRT critiques that notion. Also, the idea that things are neutral, that the way that we function in legal systems or even in education tends to reflect a white norm, a white middle class norm, and really does not reflect different racial inequities that we've historically seen and currently see in the United States. Another common tenet is the notion of counter storytelling, which is basically when we say a lot of times in education, we need to include other voices, we need to be inclusive. It has to do with countering that notion of white normativity to bring in voices and lived experiences from groups that are traditionally marginalized. And so that's what the notion of counter storytelling means. Intersectionality, I think, is one I'm assuming many people are familiar with, but that's the newer tenet that was introduced to CRT. But it has to do with the fact that we have compounded marginal identities. We have intersections in our identities, meaning that we may identify with a certain gender and also a certain race and maybe a nationality and a religion. And we have within that, we have privileged identities and we also have marginalized identities. And so it recognizes the complexity of intersectionality. So the last two are often more challenging in my experience for students, for educators, for people to understand and conceptualize. And one of them is this notion of interest convergence. And the notion of interest convergence has to do with the fact that scholars of CRT believe that civil rights made progress, like Brown versus Board of Education, because it was of interest to the dominant group, or something that is beneficial to, I'm going to say, to the dominant white race in the United States, is that something has to be of interest or value to them for there to be some kind of progress for marginalized groups of people, or historically underrepresented, left out. So, and then the last one is whiteness as property. And whiteness as property is also one that's sometimes hard for people to grasp, because they're like, well, what do you mean whiteness can be owned? You know, so whiteness as property is an interesting concept because it really has to do, again, with that white as the normative. So, for example, if you think about our history books in the United States, what kinds of things do we learn about historically? We typically learn about the wars and the founding fathers and how the US began, but we don't touch on slavery. We don't touch on some of the other things that have, many other things that have happened historically in the United States. It's also this notion of policies, curriculum only reflecting a white normative point of view. And it also has to do with who has the right to, for example, go to college, or acceptable norms of expression, dress, hair. You sometimes might hear people say things like, oh, that person's very articulate. What does that mean? Or when we think about students in, say, AP programs, or who comes to mind? And all of us are conditioned to have what's called solipsism, or this default to sort of whiteness as normative. And so that one's a little more complex. I do encourage you all to go in and read more about some of these tenets. So our goal today is to debunk those main myths and give you some basic notion of what CRT really is, especially with all the stuff going on out there. And so we're going to give you a chance now to break into groups and look at a couple of real life kinds of scenarios in K-12 education, and talk a little bit about these tenets and how they show up and which ones seem to be reflected in these scenarios. Wendy is going to put this particular slide in the chat in case you want to go back and use it as a reference in your discussions. Okay, so maybe if we can go to the next slide, and we'll just show, okay, just to explain what's happening in your groups. So what you'll do is you'll be given 2 scenarios, and if you can read each scenario, and then in your group come to a consensus as to which tenet, or maybe there are more than one tenet, are represented in that scenario and why. And then if you can take the flip side to kind of counter story that by discussing what kind of anti-racist action could be taken to counteract that particular situation, to raise our level of critical consciousness about what's really happening there, because that is the purpose of CRT, is to give us that lens so that we can really see how racism plays out in institutions. And in particular, in our case, in education. So if you can also be prepared to share back with the larger group, that may depend on our time, but we want to make sure you have enough time in your groups to discuss. Okay, so if you can just go to the next slide, Karina. So this will be your first scenario. This one has to do with a high school situation, and then you'll have a second scenario. At the bottom of each scenario, it asks you about which tenant is represented and how it shows up, and then what school teachers or leaders might do to make that situation more racially equitable from a systemic standpoint. Okay. All right, Wendy, I think we're ready to
Okay.
round up with the.
So in the link, Aaliyah shared the PowerPoint with everyone, so you'll be able to find the scenarios there as you're in that conversation. You'll be in groups of 3 to 4. I've randomly assigned you to groups of 3 to 4. So you'll see a notification on your Zoom screen, and then you'll be able to join that group. We'll have a timer of about 10 minutes per scenario. We'll send you a message through the chat, and you'll see that on your side in the group. If you have any questions, feel free to, you're allowed to come back to the main room. If Zoom kicks you out, don't worry, jump back in and we'll add you back to the group. So don't panic if Zoom cancels out on you. So I'm gonna open up the rooms right now and you'll be able to see a notification there. Co-host, you're not automatically added, but you'll be able to join any of the groups.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm
Yeah.
sorry if I had to
It's always
stop you
hard to
halfway through your conversation.
Totally cut
close
us
it
out.
out. It's always painful, yes. But so just as we start to wrap up our conversation, I was able to go into one of the groups and it's just really interesting conversation. So we'd like to ask that for scenario 1, in the chat, can you put which tenant or tenets of CRT were most represented in scenario 1, the Hampton High School situation, the STEM Academy? Just write in the chat a tenant or two that you saw show up there that you discussed in your group. Okay, excellent. Okay, whiteness is property, interest convergence, whiteness is property. Those are the main ones that came up. Okay. All right, awesome. So yes, very much so. One of the questions was what could be done to make this situation more racially equitable? Or how does CRT help us think about that? If any, would anyone like to share out? You can raise your hand. What could, is there anything, I mean, in our group, we were like really quite dismayed with how complex it is to address these situations. But we did discuss how CRT can help us be more critical in addressing these situations. Lori, did you want to speak out? Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there 2 Loris here or is it just me? I'm not looking at the participants list. I don't want to jump into somebody else's.
I think it's you that
Okay.
I'm.
I think that school leaders need to, and there needs to be district support from the central office, obviously, too, but knowing that that's in place, which it should indeed be, school leaders need to stand firm on this subject. And people don't, it's difficult for principals to call people out on their racist attitudes, but as politely as you can, but still being direct and to the point, because they're going to get ticked off anyway, the parents. You just need to realize that. So as long as we couch it in very professional but direct language, and just, weather the storm, you have to stand firm as a school leader when these situations come up and parents are ticked off.
Okay,
And not cave in because of anger.
excellent point. We have Corinne. I can't
Yeah,
see
I
these
think
slides.
this one's an interesting scenario,
Mhm.
just around exploring or examining or unpacking the academy structure and the history of academies and the intent of these college and career pathways and academies. So the intent was to provide access and opportunity for historically marginalized students, to provide them with access to A through G courses, right, as the default curriculum, but then also provide opportunities for both a college readiness and then workforce readiness, right? So that's the history of these academies. So I was sharing with my group is demographically, where do we see these academies placed, right? Sato is very close to the university here at Cal State Long Beach. It's a math and science academy. We have a similar academy, Science and Engineering Academy, on the campus of Dominguez Hills. Demographically, where are these academies situated and who do they serve? And then I think Jessica brought up the question or the issue is, what is the selection criteria? One, what is the intent of the academies? And then number two, what is the selection criteria? Who's eligible to participate in these various academies? And then how do you unpack the selection criteria with the notion or the idea that we have school choice, right? When you look at a district like Long Beach Unified, where they have wall-to-wall academies, so everyone has the opportunity to engage or participate in a particular academy. Is that true? How does that play out? So a lot of interesting questions related to this particular scenario. So I think, and I see Makisha as well thinking about or commenting on the transparency of the selection of students. The other piece that was addressed or was raised is, well, what is the role of the parents the parents of children who are historically marginalized in this kind of situation, right? Where is the advocacy on the part of those parents? How do those parents become advocates to increase the numbers of students of their own children participating in STEM academies?
Comments. I'm going to go to scenario 2, and I'm going to ask you all to do the same thing. What is the one or the one tenant or a couple of tenants that were most obvious if you're looking at the situation at Chavez Elementary, the dual immersion program? Go ahead and put in the chat the one or two tenants that really rose to the top in your group as you're looking at how CRT applies in this particular situation. Permanence of racism, interest convergence, whiteness is property, interest convergence. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you can see that the tenants or those components are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They're often all happening at the same time, but there are particular tenants that really stand out and then really help us look at that particular situation. So I'm going to ask again that question of what came up in your group when we're talking about how to use that CRT framework in addressing this particular situation in a more equitable way. These are all real things that we see often all over the place. and clearly it's still happening. So Anyone want to share out what their group, Makisha, hi,
Hi, everyone.
share out what your group discussed and how to address this in a more racially equitable way?
Yeah, I think we got real pumped up on this one, and I don't remember the addressing the situation, but we one of the things I remember one of the group members saying, Norma, is speaking with the actual people and parents that have already been in that school, in that school district. Did anyone ask them what they thought about this? And I know we know when initiatives come down, the money seems like the big shiny thing, but we were speaking about how with these parents, the English only speaking parents coming over, they're taking money, one, away from the district that they were in. So what happens to that district when those resources go to this new area? And two, what does that mean for the people who are at Chavez Elementary School? So I don't know exactly, and one of the team members can speak up what we said to address it, because we kind of got in the weeds with how wrong this was, and start talking about gentrification and education and things like that. And so we start talking about the money part.
But interesting point about bringing in counter stories. You know, what about the people that have been in that school for a long time? How could the voices of those families in that neighborhood be elevated and respected rather than disregarded in that sense, right? Dr. Glass, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, exactly. So, and to what Makisha's point was, and also what Jesus was talking about, as well as Norma and Ricky, part of the conversation goes to literally whiteness as property, but additionally interest conversions. When you take that specific program to a school that no one really was, to use the vernacular, no one was checking for, and all of a sudden they take all of their power and influence over to this other school, all of a sudden it gets some national recognition and not national, but recognition and prominence. So consequently, that is by definition going to be an interest conversion issue, but it's attached to the permanence of race because of the idea of what's happening when white families in this particular instance go to the, not the low performing, but the different school, the school that's in an area that may have a program that these parents all of a sudden want to attach themselves to. And then additionally, you have the idea of the counter story, the counter narrative that that speaks volumes, literally and figuratively, when it comes to what happens to the other school or schools that impacts this school. What you know, it's no different than my daughter's school, but we'll talk about that another time, maybe next year, when you know different programs come to other areas and you're like, well, wait a minute, all the white families want to come to this school. They weren't here for 20 years. They want to come here because we have, you know, American Sign Language, you know, so things like that happen. And it seems like in Chavez, it's a similar situation.
All right, thank you. So we're down to our last 4 minutes here of our session, and hopefully you took away a little better understanding in our real, you know, condensed period of time here, but a better understanding of what critical race theory really is and how it does show up in education, and also how it can be used as a frame to inform our actions and looking at policies. And when we talk about database decision making, you know, disaggregating data, looking at who's selected to be in certain programs and who's not, you know, just some simple things like that that can be done to better to ensure that our practices are more equitable. So one thing we'd like to close with is I'm going to ask you to put in the chat again 2 new things that you learned about CRT, and then one action you would take to help others really understand what CRT is, because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. And so what can you do to help other people better understand what the theory means and where it's actually used? Okay, some people said all 6 tenets. That's great. Okay, what did you learn and how can you help others understand? Okay, be transparent with you. You know, there's research that if you write something down, you're more likely to commit to it. So, all right. Josh says 2 things he learned: that intersectionality was added to the framework that was initially developed. He has a better understanding of critique of liberalism. All right. Committed. Excellent. Okay, I am going to ask that that you please complete our feedback survey. Aaliyah put the link in our in the chat, and we really, really appreciate your attending our series. You can also scan the QR code to give us some feedback. We know it was quick, but we really, really appreciate your participation in our Racial Justice and Education series. And we hope to continue this in the fall. And so please invite your friends to participate. Thank you so much.